When we think of Charles Dickens, our mind immediately goes to the Victorian era, because somehow Charles Dickens is the Victorian era. And Queen Victoria, whose reign was the longest in British history, was herself a big fan of Charles Dickens. She gave a copy of A Christmas Carol as a Christmas gift to the members of her family. And she herself established the tradition, first of all, of making Christmas a special holiday for children, and a moment to reflect, to think about the life our children live in our society. And the Victorian era was a hard time for children. If we think of the aftermath of the Industrial Revolution, we immediately have to consider that without the labor force of children, industrialization could never have happened in Britain. It's just a matter of figures. There were not enough people to go and work in factories. If the children had not been involved in manufacturing, in factory working, there would not have been enough labor force. But children were exploited. Children were exploited because they could be paid less than adult people, and so could women, because capitalists could pay way less money for the labor force of children and women than of men. Let's think of the fact that people, working class people, workers, were forced to live up to 16, 18 hours per day during the Victorian era, which became a major theme of the fight for workers' rights. These are the years when pollution started to destroy the health in urban towns. Let's think of the fact that Britain was the most highly urbanized country in that era. England changed its face from an agricultural country to an industrial one. A lot of people, most British people, moved to the new industrial towns which were starting to flourish, especially in the north of England. Let's think of the triangle made of Manchester, Liverpool and Chester. This is the north of England, very close to Scotland. But the life expectancy became lower. The average age was 44 before the Industrial Revolution. Then it went down, it went critically down. This was because of pollution. And the death rate among children was very high, because these people who came to live in these new industrial towns, and London was one of them, obviously, especially the eastern part, the east end of London was far poorer than the west end, and it still is. The slums where these new areas were overcrowded houses without current water, with a high crime rate, pollution. The water itself was polluted because water was necessary to provide the factories with energy, the use of a windmill, the use of engines which used the force of the current water floating in a river. But rivers were also polluted with the waste, the industrial waste, which was really poisonous. And that was the same water that people used to cook, water they used to drink. So it's very easy to understand how hard it was to live in such polluted towns. Charles Dickens was one of the victims of this new urban society. His father was sent to jail because he was not able to pay some debts he had. He was allowed to take with him most members of his family, and Charles had a lot of siblings. But Charles himself, who turned 13 when his father went to prison, was not allowed to go to prison, and he had to go and find himself a job in a factory. It was hard for him to leave his education, to leave school and go and work, go and find. The idea of children without the opportunity to have a proper education became a constant in Dickens's novels. The exploitation of children, the idea that the state did not do enough to protect the children became one of his major themes. Charles Dickens is the father of social novels because his novels dealt with the social injustice of his time. And he was really harsh towards the corruption of the government, towards the English policy, which did not protect enough especially children, women and children. Workhouses were not enough. Workhouses were terrible places where poor people in general, and especially orphans, had to be kept. Children without the loving support of a family, eventually because their father had lost his job or because he did not have enough money to afford giving food, providing all his family with enough food. But living in workhouses meant to work really, really hard. It implied for a child to be exploited. The exploitation of children was the main theme in Dickens's novels. And why is he the father of the so-called social novel? Dickens follows a period in English literature which is defined as Romanticism. Romanticism is based on the idea of emotion versus reason, feelings instead of thoughts, and the centrality of the individual. somehow romantic poets and romantic novelists did not deal much, were not so fond of social problems. Dickens upturns this perspective and goes back to the urban life, the problems of urban life. So it does not come as a surprise that when the Great Exhibition took place in 1851 and Prince Albert, Queen Victoria's husband, was so proud. Actually, all English people were so proud of this exhibition, which took place in London in the mythical Crystal Palace, which then got destroyed. There's no trace of this Crystal Palace anymore, but it was, you can imagine it as a huge building which collected stuff from all over the British Empire. And the British Empire during the Victorian age was really enormous. 1/4 of the world was under the British domination. English people were so proud, but Charles Dickens said, okay, it is fine to hold such a huge thing as a great exhibition, but now we should think of a second exhibition, an exhibition of what goes bad in England, a second exhibition of the social injustices which have been caused by the Industrial Revolution, because the Industrial Revolution meant that rich people, the former gentry, people who owned a lot of lands in the country, have now turned to capitalists. They own the factories and they get richer and richer. But what happens to the poor part of society? What happens to the working class people? They become poorer and poorer. Their standard of life decreases instead of improving. This is what Charles Dickens is interested in showing. Even Dickens's characters end up becoming at least middle-class people, not to say that they become professionally fulfilled people. David Copperfield himself becomes some sort of lawyer. But we have to think of the starting point of David's life, when he was forced to work in a factory and to live in a workhouse, just like Charles Dickens did. There's a famous scene in David Copperfield when David, who still hasn't understood how things go in a workhouse, literally wants some more, meaning he wants some more food.
Please, sir, I want some more.
What? What? Ask for more?
The message is clear. Ignorance is more dangerous than want, than poverty, because if a child, if a person doesn't have the right to get a proper education, it's very hard for him to improve his social standing. So once again, the problem of children and the education of children, which was so basic during the Victorian era. Hard Times is a perfect portrait of what an industrial town is like. The name of the town where the action is set, is fictional. The name is Coke Town, which means any industrial town polluted with smoke and fog, polluted with fog. Any industrial town where factories got their energy using coke, which was a really polluting element for the air that people breathe. In fact, Dickens literally says that Coketown is the town of red bricks, but these red bricks should have been red if they had not been covered with all this filth, with all this smog. Smog is literally a new word. It is smoke and fog. It was created after the Industrial Revolution destroyed the previous image of English cities and towns before the Industrial Revolution. The protagonist of Hard Times is Mr. Thomas Gradgrind. He's a teacher. He works in a workhouse. He teaches these children, these kids, and he does it in his way, that is the utilitarian way. His real name, his name, Thomas, stands for a man of facts. Traditionally, Thomas is a man who only believes in what he can see, in what he can truly see. And he mirrors Coketown. Coketown is a town where everything that cannot be stated in figures simply does not exist. Everything has to be real, facts everywhere, both in the material and in the immaterial. You could not distinguish a church from a school, from a hospital, because there was no room left for imagination. Art, beauty had not the right to exist in such a utilitarian society. And Thomas Gradgrind teaches these principles of utilitarianism. Let's watch this famous scene where Mr. Gradgrind is questioning a girl, Sissy Jupes, who commits the mistake of calling herself with her first name, but short for Cecilia. It's common for children to make their names short, but Mr. Gradgrind does not accept that she might call herself with a short name. He calls her girl number 20, because kids in a workhouse were literally numbers.
And in this school, you'll be brought up in it too. Stick to facts, sir. That is your charge here. Girl number 20. Who is that girl? I don't know that girl.
Sissy Jupes, sir.
Sissy is not a name. Don't call yourself Sissy. Call yourself Cecilia.
But his father always calls me Sissy, sir. He always did.
Then he has no business to do it. Tell him he mustn't. Who is your father?
He belongs to horse riding, if you please, sir.
We don't know anything of the horse riding here. Don't tell us of that. And tell him there must be no more Sissy. Give me your definition of a horse. Girl number 20, unable to define a horse. Girl number 20, possessed of no facts in reference to one of the commonest of animals. Some boy's definition of a horse. Yours.
Quadruped, graminivorous, 40 teeth, namely 24 grinders, 4 eye teeth and 12 incisors. Sheds coat in spring, and in marshy countries sheds hooves too. hooves hard and requiring to be shod with iron. A horse, sir.
Cecilia Jupe.
David, Oliver Twist are the children of this new industrial society. The protagonist of A Christmas Carol, Ebenezer Scrooge, who is visited by the three ghosts of Christmas past, present, and future, meets the children of industrialization, ignorance and want.
How do you show me this? What has it to do with me?
Are they not of the human race? Look here, beneath my robe. Look upon these.
What are they?
They are your children. They are the children of all who walk the earth unseeing. Their names are ignorance and want. Beware of them. For upon their brow is written the word doom. They spell the downfall of you and all who deny their existence.
Have they no refuge, no resource?
Are there no workhouses? Are there no prisons?
Cover them. I do not wish to see them.
I thought as much. They are hidden.
Bitzer is the young man that gives Mr. Gradgrind the perfect definition of a horse. And this is what children were taught to be. They were taught how to be perfect machines, utilitarian people who think that what is useful is good. There's no room for imagination. The only thing that matters is facts. We will see that in the end, Bitzer will somehow betray his loving teacher because he will get the job that Mr. Gradgrind's son will lose for stealing money in the bank where he works. Bitzer denounces this crime because he will say, I have done what you have been teaching, Mr. Gradgrind. You taught me how to be a utilitarian man. And what matters is that I got the job. So this is what you wanted me to be, and this is what I am. And this is the worst part of the Victorian age, this era of progress, of peace, because England reached its maximum power under the reign of Queen Victoria. But as Charles Dickens wanted to show, to portray, it is an era of social injustice, especially for children. And this is something Charles Dickens really could not stand. And he did his best to let the English people, and I should say all the rest of the world, he wanted everybody to know what was going on in England, especially in the so-called slums, in the so-called mushroom towns, where alongside with the wealth that capitalists could store up, there were so many people who really suffered from harsh, severe poverty. This is the lesson that Charles Dickens gives all of us.